Let's look at some transitions. For video transitions, what I use the most is the cross dissolve. It's set to be my default transition. Sometimes I use dip to black, which goes to black and back, or dip to white, which does the same with a different color. Some of my other favorites are push and wipe. Some of the transitions, when you click them, have adjustments you can make in the effect controls window. Wipe has the direction of the wipe, and it has a border width if you want a border on your wipe, but no edge feathering, which is really strange to me. And Premiere has several other transitions that you might be interested in. Try a bunch out and see what your favorites are. Cross dissolve is surrounded by blue because that's my default. If you mainly use something else, like dip to black, you can right click and set selected as the default transition. You can also find other transitions online. Some you can find for free, and others you have to pay for. For example, Red Giant offers universe transitions. Most of the free transitions I've seen show up here in presets and work a little bit differently, so you'll have to test them out. Depending on the style of video that you're working on, you may use a lot of video transitions, custom video transitions, or barely any at all. Most movies use cross dissolves and dips to black, and rarely anything else. But pushes and wipes can also be seen in popular movies. With fast-paced web content, many video transitions are welcomed to speed up the pace. It will all depend on the look you're going for. When you place effects onto a clip, it sometimes really makes a difference what order they're in. For example, if I put a fast color correction here and take out all the saturation, and then I use a faded preset, it's going to look like this. We can see some yellows and grays. But if I drag this on top of the fast color corrector, now first it fades, then it takes out all the saturation. We can see only black and white here. A little bit of yellow, only white. A little bit of yellow, and only white. Depending on the effects that you're using, this could really change what your footage looks like. And the general rule is that effects are read from the top to the bottom. It's like if I add an adjustment layer here, and I add noise, but here I add the desaturation again. It's the same as layering adjustment layers and placing each effect on one and then the other. If I have a clip and I've adjusted the position and the scale to move the clip to a specific place on the screen, in order to get this same clip in the same place, I don't want to have to retype these numbers. So at first you would think, I'll click on position, hit Command C for copy, and click here on position and press paste, but that doesn't work. However, you can copy the entire motion effect. Click motion, Command C for copy, and here I don't even have to click motion. Command V for paste, and it pastes in the exact same location. This goes for motion, opacity, or any effect on your clip. Let's look at the difference between cropping and masking. First of all, the crop effect can be applied to your footage and cropped to any location in a straight line. And you can feather the edges. This is a quick, easy tool if you need straight edges. But let's look at a mask. Here in opacity, the ellipse mask, the 4-point polygon mask, and the free draw Bezier curve mask. I'll click on a square. This creates a mask on the footage. Each one of these points are draggable, and if I click in the middle of a line, I can create another point. I can also feather these edges, and I can expand or contract. This might be exactly what you need to achieve some specific result. Let's use an example. I'm going to remove the attributes and start from 0. Let's blur this little fellow's face. I'm going to hold Alt and drag this layer onto a second track, and then go to my effects. I'll search blur and use Gaussian blur. I'll turn up the blurriness to 64. His face will definitely be blurred now. And use a mask. This circle mask, I want to drag it straight onto his face and adjust it to where it only covers what I need to blur out. I'm going to feather the edges a little bit so it looks a little bit better. And look at the picture. You see the baby, but don't see his face. And if I toggle track 1 on and off, you'll see that the blur is just on that area of his face. But what if I don't want to duplicate the layer? Let's get rid of this. Let's reapply the Gaussian blur to this track, blur it again, and everything is blurred. That's a problem. The same icons from the opacity effect are also on the Gaussian blur effect. So here, I'm going to do a free draw and drag, 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 and drag around his face, and it's blurred out again. This is putting the mask specifically on this effect. If I wanted the reverse, I can press inverted, and we can see the baby's face, but nothing else. This way we could stack the masks, using this for opacity, and still having his face visible, and the rest of the body blurred. Let's talk about color. Okay, temperature. Videos that are bluer seem like they're a little bit colder, and those that are orange or red seem a little bit warmer. So if you hear those phrases, cooler, warmer, that's what it means. And then tint, we have a green tint and a purple-red tint. By adjusting these two sliders, you can correct most footage. The goal is to get everything looking correct, thus color correction, and then you can put your own flair on it. Sometimes I use the white balance selector. I find something that's a pure white on the screen and click it. Here, it did turn that white, but it looks too cool to me. So I'm gonna warm it up just a little bit. Anytime you make adjustments, double click and it will go back to center. Here in the tone section, I work my way up, blacks, whites, shadows, highlights, contrast, exposure, and make adjustments that way. In the creative tab, we have different looks. You can make the picture look like faded film. You can sharpen the edges. Let's undo all that. Saturation brings up all colors equally, where vibrance only brings up the colors that are not already vibrant. For example, in this shot, the red is already a vibrant color. So when I bring the vibrance up, the yellows really start to pop in the curtains. You can see it more clearly if I take all the vibrance away. We barely see any color here, but we still see the dress is red. If you want to only change the colors in the dark areas, like her hair, these books on the bookshelf, and the shadow under the couch, we can change it here. But the further you go, you'll see it in other places too. The same with the highlight tint. That's for the bright areas on the screen. Here in curves, this is how brights are treated, and this is how darks are treated. For example, this dot represents the darkest thing on the screen, and this dot at the top right represents the brightest thing on the screen. And here's the middle. If I place a dot right here and drag straight up, you'll see the screen is now divided. Everything dark is very dark, and everything bright is very bright. That's too extreme, but we can make an S-curve, which is a common practice, to increase the contrast. It makes the darks darker and the brights brighter. Here, in color wheels and match, it's similar to what we had in the creative pane. Midtones, shadows, and highlights. You probably would not make any extreme changes here, but just minor adjustments. The HSL secondary pane is to refine your colors a little bit more, and vignette is to place a dark or bright vignette around your footage. To really get the hang of each slider, I like to drag all the way to the left and all the way to the right to see what will happen in the extreme, so I can make minor adjustments and then toggle the checkbox to see how it changes my footage. So what do these scopes do? Let's check them out. These are the two scopes that I like to use. The waveform on the left and the vector scope on the right. I'm gonna make it bigger. Let's look at the waveform first. Here we have 0 at the bottom and 100 at the top. 100 means totally white and 0 means totally black. And here from left to right, it represents from the left to the right of the screen. If we look at them next to each other, we see a big dark spot, which is her hair, is represented here in the middle of the screen in the dark section. We see an accumulation of colors. There's not a lot of dark stuff on the left side of the screen, but on the right side of the screen we have the shadow under the couch and these books in the background here. So we don't have many colors at the bottom left of the waveform, but we have a little strip right here of dark colors. And we see the shadow stop near the edge of the frame, the same as we see the colors stop here at the edge of the frame on the right side of the waveform. This waveform is split into red, green, and blue, RGB, and since the entire frame seems a little bit warm, we see a lot of red at the top of the waveform. If we come over here and adjust and bring the temperature to the blue side, we see we decrease in the reds, except here, which is her dress, and the blues start to go higher up. Now let's look at the vector scope. The vector scope shows colors and saturation. Zero saturation is here in the middle, and very saturated is further out. We see red, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and magenta. Since the woman is wearing a red dress, we have this big peak right here in the red area. And since the curtains are on the yellow side, we have a big peak right here. Watch what happens as I pull the tint over to the green side. We still see that burst of red, but a lot of the colors were pulled towards green, and yellow is still a big part of the screen. Watch as I pull the saturation all the way down, and then I pull it up. This strange looking hexagon is good to use for a rule of thumb of how saturated to be. Usually, you don't want to saturate outside of that boundary box. So here the saturation at 115 looks good, but here the yellows start to look oversaturated. And one more fun fact about this vector scope is this line right here is skin tone. So if I use a mask and cut everything out except this piece of skin, here on the vector scope, we see the spike is right on the skin tone line. Now let's do a quick color correction on this piece of footage. I like to start with the blacks, and watching the waveform, I like to bring them as far down as possible without touching the zero line. And the whites, the same. Let's go to temperature and tint, and then we may come back to the blacks and whites. I see everything is very red, so I'm going to bring the tint towards the green side and go down until it starts to look weird. Looks too green here, let's come back a little bit, and that feels about right. It also feels very warm, so let's go on the blue side for temperature. That looks too cold, so let's bring it back right about here. Now I can readjust the blacks and the white. The blacks don't look like they changed that much, but the white certainly did. Let's bring them up, and it still looks a little orange to me, so I'm going to go a little bit further to the blue side and a little bit to the red side. And looking at this white piece of furniture, it seems like it has a bit of a green tint. I'm going to bring the tint a little bit more towards the magenta. That's looking good to me. Now I'll go to shadows. How dark do I want the shadows to be? This is extreme left, and this is extreme right. I really like seeing the curls in this woman's hair. So I'll darken it, but not too dark to where you lose the detail. Now the highlights. If I bring them all the way to the right or all the way to the left, what happens? I like them right about here. It highlights her face without blowing anything out. And now the contrast. Complete contrast, no contrast. You know what? I like it right in the middle. And exposure. If I go too far to the right, you can see here things start to hit the 100 mark, thus blowing it out. And if I go too far dark, nothing looks right either. I think right at 0 works for this shot. Let's toggle it on and off and see what happened. I like this a lot better. That's your basic correction, and that could be all you need. But let's go down to creative. I don't need a look or faded film adjustment, even sharpen. The footage is already pretty sharp. If you sharpen too much with faces, people start to see all of their wrinkles, and it's not very flattering. De-sharpen too much, it blurs everything. So I'll keep it in the middle. And vibrance is my favorite. I like bumping that up to as far as I can go without it looking strange. And personally, I always like a little bit of saturation. I have to be mindful of the vector scope because here the red has gone outside of the hexagon, so I'm going to bring it back. It looks strange too. I'll skip curves, color wheels, and secondary and go straight to vignette. I'll put a dark vignette on it, make all my adjustments so I can see what I'm doing, and then taper it back a little bit. Toggle on and off. And here at the top left, I can toggle on and off all of the correction. Let's go through some common video effects and see what they do. Blur and sharpen, Gaussian blur. This is my preferred blur. Let's turn the blurriness up. It's blurring the pixels horizontally and vertically. You can blur just horizontally or just vertically if you're looking for that kind of look. Normally, I want them both blurred, and I want to repeat edge pixels so there's not a vignetted look. For something different, you can use directional blur. This is similar to what we saw in Gaussian blur, but you can go in any direction that you'd like, even diagonally. The invert effect I use from time to time, not for footage. If I have a black logo on the screen and I need to make it a white logo, this is an easy effect to use. If I don't want to color everything, I can use a few of these color correction tools. If I don't want to go all the way into Lumetri color, because I just need to brighten something up, I'll use the brightness and contrast effect to brighten something up like this, and maybe adjust the contrast. I've used the corner pin effect a few times to change where each one of the corners is located. For example, if here is 0, 0, and I increase 100 and 100, On the upper left, it will bring the corner in this way and down this way. You can distort your footage in all different ways using this effect. Warp Stabilizer we've gone over in another video. It's a way to stabilize your footage that sometimes works, but sometimes doesn't. For an easy way to go to black and white footage, drag the black and white effect onto your footage. If you need to key out a color, like a green screen, you can use the color key. Drag that on, and using the color picker, you'll tell the computer what is the color that you want to be clear, increase the color tolerance, and that will dissolve. If you have a green background, that works well. And you can make small adjustments with edge thin and edge feather. If you have a white background that you're trying to remove, Luma key works better than color key. Premiere also includes an obsolete folder for older effects that have been improved upon. For example, fast blur used to be what you needed instead of Gaussian blur. It would do a similar effect with much less computer power used. But now, Gaussian blur has been optimized, and so have the alternatives to all these obsolete effects. In Transform, I have horizontal flip, which I often use for B-roll in certain situations. When we talked about transitions before, I mentioned that the wipe does not have edge feathering. Here, you can keyframe the same thing. It just takes longer. Here I could keyframe here, and keyframe over with a big edge feather. Here in Video Effects, you can also see some of your purchased effects, like Red Giant's Universe package. And the last effect is timecode, if you want to display the timecode at the bottom of your footage. These are a few effects that I use, but for the best way to find the effects that you need, experiment.